Hi, this is Calissa Spirit, and this week she made me play Champions of Krynn. Now, I'd say there'd be spoilers, but I don't even know what went on in this game. And there's gonna be definitely foul language, so be warned.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to She Made Me Play, the podcast where two longtime video game players force each other, sometimes more than less. So there was a lot of forcing this time. Force each other to play our favorite video game. This week's game is one of my favorite Dungeons & Dragons games for the PC called Champions of Krynn.
Wow.
And this was an exercise for Calissa, because I'm a couple years older than her, so this was old hat for me, this type of game. But this is her very first experience. So let me explain what we're talking about here today. So these are a line of video games called the Gold Box games, which were developed for PC between 1988 and 1992. So these were produced by a little company called Strategic Simulations. Now, TSR, the company that owned Dungeons & Dragons since the very beginning, they had never made a game before, especially nothing for PC. There were a couple of things that had used their name before, but nothing official. So Strategic Simulations had been asking TSR, and TSR just hadn't been interested in making any types of Dungeons & Dragons games, but they took a chance on SSI and gave them the license, and it was the first time ever anyone had ever done anything like this. And instead of just making one Dungeons & Dragons game, SSI came with a bold plan to make a ton of games in different series. So between 1988 and 1992, they released 12 Gold Box games, all with the same type of engine and the same type of gameplay, with further improvements. Now, this was not the first Gold Box game that existed. The first one was in 1988, and that was called Pool of Radiance. And then there was a sequel to that, actually two sequels of that, The Curse of the Azure Bonds and The Secret of the Silver Blades, which came just before Champions of Krynn. Champions of Krynn was the fourth Dungeons & Dragons video game in the Gold Box series released for PC. Now, Calissa, you may not believe this, but there were actually a lot of improvements in Champions of Krynn versus earlier Gold Box games.
Are you going to make me play those?
There are more Gold Box games on our official She Made Me Play list, but probably not for a little while.
Oh, boy.
So it's estimated that SSI sold a total copies of 117,000 copies of Champions of Krynn. Now that doesn't sound like a lot in today's numbers, but it was a fairly respectable showing for 1990. The game was reviewed in Dragon Magazine number 156. Now, Calissa, you may not know, but Dragon Magazine was the Dungeons & Dragons publication in the 90s. The reviewers gave the game 5 out of 5 stars. Computer Gaming World reviewed it favorably, approving of the non-combat activities specifically, but then criticized it for a couple of different niggling things like lack of experience points for unconscious players during combat, stuff like that. She concluded that Champions of Krynn is a pretty good game overall, but you have to be aware of its failings. IGN did an article called The Top 11 Dungeons & Dragons Games of All Time in 2014. And guess what this one was ranked?
I can't even imagine.
It was ranked number 10. Now, you might think like, oh, that's all the D&D games, but no, there's almost 40 Dungeons & Dragons games.
Yeah, the Neverwinter series, Baldur's Gate series. I mean, that's what, like 3-4 games right there.
Yeah, there were a ton of different Dungeons & Dragons games after these, but this was one of the original ones.
I could tell.
So it's definitely one of the one of the foundations for the game series.
It definitely was a callback because I played, the first Dungeons & Dragons I played was 2.5. I think 2.5 or 2. It was a long time ago. And now Dungeons & Dragons, everything's positives better. But when I was looking at my character's AC and I'm like, oh, I have a 1 AC. Wait a minute. Crap. Oh, no, that's good.
Yeah, so we've mentioned in other podcasts that Calissa and I actually play Dungeons & Dragons together today, currently. And I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since, I want to say, about 1988. So this was really great for me because this gave me the opportunity to play the Dungeons and Dragons, which I knew at home for the first time ever, in like an official Dungeons and Dragons type thing. I had played other games like Ultima and things like that, but it didn't have that official Dungeons and Dragons feel, which this game does, of course, because it's the real thing. Now, like Calissa said, that for people who are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, this is the very first Dungeons and Dragons edition. So a lot of the rules are extremely different than we're used to. And this game stuck to the rules pretty accurately, with some exceptions, which we may talk about. So Calissa, going into this game, what was your experience previously with any types of older computer role-playing games, especially anything on the PC?
Older computer role-playing games specifically? Baldur's Gate 2. That was the oldest one I played on the PC.
Baldur's Gate 2 was a couple years after that.
Just a wee bit. I mean, the sound effects in this game reminded me of Pong on Atari.
So, in this game's defense, I don't think Calissa really has a good, accurate representation of what Pong actually sounds like, because this sounds a lot better than Pong.
No, it doesn't. When you move, it's like bong.
Well, yes,
like
yes,
weird
yes.
noises. The
But
sound
when
effects
you
were.
cast a spell, it does blue, and when you kill someone, like, eh. I mean, it's got different noises for different occurrences
It has
in the
all
game.
of 10 noises and no music, except for the intro.
It actually does have music periodically throughout the game. You may not have gotten far enough to get to another musical track.
Yeah, I definitely did not get far enough because I kept dying and having to reset my damn game.
Well, that may be true. And I actually feel like I'm a little guilty in this respect, in that I didn't properly prepare you for the difficulty of the game. I didn't properly coach you a little bit on how to set up your party and how to play an old school game. So, as the audience may know, I'm a little older than you, so I've been playing these old school games for my entire gaming career. And a lot of these types of things definitely were natural to me because I am used to saving after every combat, to saving before resting, that type of thing. And I should have made that really clear to you.
Oh, no. Saving after combat's fine and good, except for when you save after combat and it asks you a dumb question for that stupid copyright protection crap. I've never played a game before that required you to use 3 PDFs in order to play the game. And I'm not talking cheat guides. I'm talking about your journal entries and what the hell's going on is in another document outside of the damn game. And a few times when I went to save, it's like, in the blah, blah, blah handout, under combat, what's the 7th word? And I'm like, what the hell is this? Is it a bug? Enter, and then the game crashes. Or kicks me out because it thinks I stole a whatever-year-old game? What the hell is that?
Well, first of all, in the game's defense, this type of thing, and people who are my age may remember this, especially PC gamers. You were a console gamer back in the early 90s, so you didn't really encounter a lot of these things. But this was extremely common in PC games back in the 90s.
First of all, what idiot would steal a game that requires handouts in order to play and not have the handouts?
Well, that's the whole point, is that you couldn't. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine. I want you to close your eyes and picture the world in the year 1990, right? And if someone had a computer, how difficult would it be for them to copy a computer disk?
You do realize I was 8. I don't remember that.
All they had to do was put a disk in the drive and type copy, and they would make a perfect digital copy. So they could easily copy the actual game file. Now, if you go back to 1990, do you remember what a actual copy machine looked like back then?
No.
Well, that's because they were expensive and usually reserved for businesses. It was not easy to copy something back then. Not everyone had a phone which had a, 4K camera on it that you could just snap every picture.
All right. You keep adding in how old you are. We get it. Keep going.
Yeah. So the idea was, in the early 90s, it was much more difficult to copy the manual than it was to copy the game. So this was extremely common, where to prevent just casual copyright theft, Many games of the time would require you to do something with the manual. Now, it got much worse than this. There were sliders where they would have different pieces of paper that overlaid and that slid past each other. You'd have secret windows with codes that would be revealed. People who are older and have played these older PC games, you know this is super common. I remember playing SimCity, and SimCity came with this dark red guide to cities, and then it had the pictures of different buildings in black ink on dark red. I almost couldn't read it. But the thing is, I couldn't copy it. And it would ask me every time I started up the game what this type of building was.
Speaking of not being able to read it.
Okay, so the font for this game is a little challenging. I agree. It's the font for all the gold box games is supposed to invoke like a ye olde kind of aesthetic, but maybe they took it a little bit too far. And on our, super high resolution 4K displays, it comes out really super sharp, which is not how it was originally intended. So it looks super sharp and blocky, and it's a little hard to read. On a phosphorescent CRT, especially a small one. So remember, I played this on a 13 or 14-inch CRT that was a little bit blurry and a little bit phosphorescent, so everything kind of blurred together a little bit more.
Yeah, but you made me play this game on a 4K 40-inch TV. It didn't work out. I had to play it in like Squinto box on my monitor, or I couldn't read squat.
Well, yeah, that would simulate the accurate experience of playing on a 13-inch.
Even without the Squinto box, the green text with the terrible font. I was getting a headache just trying to read what the heck was going on. Okay, I take it back. Now I know why they gave us the PDFs. Because you couldn't read anything in the damn game.
So the other reason that there was a lot of content in the manuals that came with the game was to save on space on the discs. Because back then it was a real premium if they had to add another disc to the entire package, because that increased their cost a lot more than just adding extra pages to the manual. Most games of this era came with quite comprehensive manuals. You would be shocked if you saw the original manual for Baldur's Gate in person. It was really thick and ring-bound, and this was similar, obviously coming with 3 separate manuals. One, kind of an instruction manual for the game. One, the journal, which has all the journal entries, and then all the stats and spells and things like that. And then 3, the hint book, which it actually didn't come with back in the day originally, but was like the hint books you can buy separately. And as you probably noticed, the hint book was really helpful in a game this difficult.
This difficult was an understatement. You don't even realize how many times I was traveling down a blocky hallway and got completely lost because all I see is the same walls over and over and over again.
Okay, so for our listeners, let me describe what the actual gameplay looks like in this. So there are 2 different interfaces for the game. One interface is the exploration interface, and that has about a quarter of the screen in the upper left. Is kind of a first-person view, but not always. Sometimes it shows like a campfire or an inn or something like that. On the right, you'll see your party, and you can easily scroll through your party members with the arrow keys. And then at the bottom, you will have text and some options.
I disagree about easily. I totally disagree about scrolling easily. You just lied to the audience.
Well, the picking your character, you just press up and down.
Yeah, the easily in the menus, nay.
Okay, and then at the bottom, there's a set of menu commands. So you scroll up and down to pick your character, and then you scroll left and right to pick the command and just hit enter to select it. So there you can select things like move or search or cast to cast spells and all that type of thing. And like I said, everything uses the official Dungeons & Dragons rules. So your favorite spells like Sleep and Magic Missile were all there. So it all made, for someone who had been playing D&D for years already, it made a ton of sense to me. And it was a real great breath of fresh air to be able to play these types of spells, these types of characters at home without having to schedule a weekly D&D session. So you had this first-person view in the upper left. You had your characters, you had your text. Then the other view was when you engaged in combat. And that would be kind of the left 2/3 of the screen, where like kind of an isometric view of the battlefield. And then on the right, there would be some stats. And then on the bottom, you had your menu options again. So this was just a slightly different layout only for combat. And this allowed a really incredible, for the time, tactical combat experience. What did you think of the overall tactical combat?
Miss. Yeah, I spent the majority of the time in combat being not hit by the enemies and missing the enemies. Because obviously you start off at low level, but I love playing Dungeons and Dragons. But, when you miss in combat, when you're playing with your friends, you hear sounds, you speak, you interact with your friends. This is just a stupid sound effect that you missed, and then the enemy missed. I feel like I spent most of the 10 hours missing the target and then missing me.
You're right. That's how it is at low level in Dungeons and Dragons. And that was, they wanted the game to feel just like it would be in a real D&D game. And with, +1 to hit or whatever back in the day at level 1, you're going to have a lot of trouble hitting anything. And that's something that's actually pretty common, but the game portrayed it pretty accurately. So this is something that really comes down to the core of RPGs for me. There are 2 different ways to think about combat. And this is the same whether it's in Mass Effect or Final Fantasy VI or Tales of Berseria or Champions of Krynn. There are 2 different schools of RPG combat. One school is to make it as quick as possible. There's no tactical positioning. You just kind of do your attacks and it's over as quickly as possible. This is really common in games like Final Fantasy series and traditional JRPG games, I would say, right? Where you just kind of have 2 sides, one on each side, and the combat is usually simple and it's usually over in less than a minute.
Yeah, I agree with that. You're talking about the turn-based combat mostly.
Yeah, like your traditional classic JRPG combat. So that's one school of RPG combat. The other school of RPG combat is like this, where the combat is designed to be one of the central focuses of the gameplay, and you will spend most of your time in combat instead of exploration. And that means that there is advanced tactical combat, there's lots of different options, there's positioning, there's many characters to contend with, many enemies, and much more advanced combat dynamics.
Yeah, but you can still have that type of combat, without having to miss 99% of the time. I mean, the combat, despite the graphics, was sort of similar to Fire Emblem series. But, in Fire Emblem, the combat takes a lot longer than turn-based RPGs, but there's still the tactical element. But it doesn't feel so boring.
Well, I definitely didn't feel the boredom that you felt during the combat. I was actually enthralled by the combat, and I was shocked that 29 years later, how good the combat felt to me.
I'll just have to disagree.
To me, at least, comparing this to Final Fantasy VI, the most recent JRPG, Tales of Berseria doesn't count. The combat in this was much more engrossing to me than in Final Fantasy because it felt, number one, much more dangerous because it was pretty easy to have people die, and it had the dynamics of real Dungeons and Dragons with spells like Sleep and Hold Person that really brought an intensity to the combat. Because you'd think, oh, I gotta get that caster before he gets the charm person off, right?
No, I get that. And I mean, the majority of the combats, because it was a lot of guys to little of your guys, I mean, you had to cast Hold Person, you had to charm, you had to sleep, you had to, do gas cloud, all those things, or you were just gonna die. I get that. I mean, I'm not knocking really the strategic part of the combat. I'm knocking how just, when there were no casters and you didn't want to waste your spells, because we'll get into how annoying memorizing the spells after each combat frickin' was. But, just sitting there, miss. It started to just really get on my nerves. And the problem about this game, because it was so tactical, and you actually had to think, and there was no sound, really, except for the lame little sound effects that were few and far between, I couldn't even watch YouTube videos while I was playing because I actually had to pay attention. So it was like a double-edged sword for me.
So you're saying you are so engrossed by this game that you had to give it your full attention? If that's not a great review, I don't know what is.
Not by choice.
Listeners, you heard it here first. Calissa was completely engrossed by the combat in Champions of Krynn, so she had to give it her full attention.
No, actually, I had to give it my full attention because you're the one that said, oh, at least try to get to the catacombs before your 10 hours are up. Me.
So, as always on She Made Me Play, we focused on completing 10 hours of Champions of Krynn. This game is, I don't remember how long it is. I have beaten this game. I beat this game in 1990. But in this session, after 10 hours, I was barely into the second dungeon. I made it to the second town and into the start of the second dungeon. This game is heavy on dungeon crawling, but I was impressed that Calissa made it at least to the, she was 2/3 of the way through the first dungeon, and that's not bad in 10 hours for your very first gold box experience.
I had to recreate my characters so many times because, I remembered a little in Baldur's Gate too, where, especially if you were not very knowledgeable about the combat and things, there were certain classes that you just couldn't play as the main character because you would just die. And if you died, it was kind of game over. Where this, luckily, it wasn't that way because there was no quote-unquote main character. How it worked is you created the party. So you got to pick the classes, you got to, roll their stats. Every character was pre-made by you. But you could definitely create a losing team off the bat and losing characters, in my opinion. It was pretty BS that you cannot res elves at all. And I realized that that's how original D&D was, I guess. I played after the fact, so I didn't know that. But I like elves. A lot of my D&D characters were elves. So, of course, half my party was an elf. First combat, half my party's now dead, and I can't understand why I can't revive them. It was stupid.
So, and this is partially my fault, that I did not make it clear that you're never supposed to res people at the temple. That if you lose someone in combat and they're dead, you just need to reload. And I guess it's because of my experience with a lot of these older games that were brutally difficult in comparison to the hand-holding we have today in a lot of games, where this type of game, you could just totally fuck yourself over big time and have it unrecoverable. And that's something that just doesn't happen these days. So this was normal back in the early 90s, and it was just something you had to learn to deal with.
Yeah, the first time I died was, I was having a hard time reading the text. It was the first time I started playing the game, and I didn't notice that they're like, yeah, adventurers, you need to buy armor. Even though you're adventurers, you don't have armor on you. I don't know how the hell you got to this town because there's monsters everywhere, but go buy armor before you get to the dungeon. And I didn't see that. So I went out. And combat took forever. And a bunch of my people died. And that's when you said, oh, didn't you see so-and-so with the green funky text that you can't read said you have to go to the armory to buy armor? What idiot adventurer doesn't start off with armor? But then I created a knight. And that bitch comes with armor. So I almost just wanted to make my whole party like knights and clerics. And then I was done.
That's true. The Knights of Solemnia do come with plate mail and a sword. But yeah, it's, again, a very old school mechanic that they want you to experience doing everything yourself.
Yeah, I get it. I get what they were going for. And obviously it was a well-rated game back in the day. But, oh my God, let's get back to the menus and memorizing and... wasn't there a quick button? It's like, I just want these spells. Just memorize these spells. But then again, it was a godsend when we found the fix command in the camp menu. So what that is it heals up all your parties and auto memorizes all the healing spells. So you don't actually have to go into every character sheet and select memorize for the different spells. So I was just rolling around with I had 2 clerics, and they had heals and hold person. That's all they rolled with. It's like I should have a save slot for that shit.
That's a pretty common loadout for this type of game. But yeah, that was, again, part of the dynamic is that they wanted you to actually go in and memorize every single spell. Every time you cast Magic Missile, you got to sit down, select memorize again, and pick it. Now, that fix button to automatically heal your party, I don't remember that from the original game, and that's why I didn't mention it when we started playing this game. But it definitely made it a lot easier and helped out a lot. Now, as far as everything else, now let me get ready to blow your mind. Okay? Remember how did you play this game mostly? What buttons did you use?
the arrow buttons. That's it, because the mouse, I mean, this game was able to use the mouse, but it was so bad. It was just like non-usable, actually.
Okay. So the mouse was unusable, but you used the arrow keys, right?
Yeah.
Okay. In the original Gold Box games, the arrow keys only worked in combat.
Oh, painful. So what the hell did you do?
So when you wanted to hit magic, you hit M. And when you wanted to hit cast, you hit C. And when you wanted to hit move, you hit V or whatever it was.
Oh, jeez.
So you could only use the hotkeys, the keys that were highlighted, as you probably noticed. But that was the only way. And you couldn't pick things with the arrow keys.
And it took me forever to figure out that if you used like the 7, 9, 3, or 1 key, you could move and attack diagonally. That was a mind blow after hour 8 when I discovered this.
Again, the funny thing is this was exceedingly common back in the day. That when you played a game with the keyboard, because obviously you're not used to playing pretty much anything with the keyboard, you would use
my
those
macros in WoW on the keyboard. I use those buttons, but I'm using my left hand. Here I had to use my right. It was all wonky.
Yeah, you would use those right number keys as an 8-way pad. This is, when games didn't really work with joysticks and that type of thing. So that was really common.
The way we discovered it was acting like a rogue in a raid in WoW, just like face planting on the keyboard. And it's like, oh, diagonal. Sweet.
Yeah, I should have been more clear about that to help you out just a little bit.
Hey, I made it to the catacombs. And it's funny, after I got... Okay, so I will give it a small, minuscule amount of praise. Once I got into it a little, I played it for like 5 hours straight yesterday because I got my rhythm down. So I was just like, okay, miss, whatever. Let me pay attention to over here. Okay, let's cast this. I mean, besides the having after every combat to save and maybe have to do a scavenger hunt for like words in the stupid player handbook or whatever, it was okay.
It was okay. What was your favorite part of Champions of Krynn?
When I hit 10 hours.
What was your favorite part while you were playing?
You didn't ask me that.
I just did.
I cannot think of any, actually. I really can't.
Okay, let me explain some of the cool parts, which you may not have noticed, but I thought were really impressive. Now, remember, this is 1990, so this is really old school computer gaming. But there were some moments which you're like, wow, that's pretty innovative. Like when you meet someone and they join your party for a while and you don't have control over them. That was pretty cool, right?
I've played games like that before, but it was interesting when that duder joined the party and then betrayed you in the next room. That guy, got held and then he got splatted on the wall.
Yeah, he comes up to your party, says, hey, I'm trapped here too. Let's go out and get out of here. And he joins with you. And then when you get into the next room, he's like, oh, see, I told you I'd find some people. And then everyone attacks you. Really incredible for the time type of gameplay and something that really is not even all that common in current games.
I have to agree with that. I mean, now that you think about it, that was probably one of the only things that really stood out to me in the game.
What about also when you would go into certain rooms and it was clear that there were things going on in the game, like without you being there? Like you'll say, you stumble into a room and there's a cleric doing something or fleeing, and one group is attacking you and it says that another group is fleeing to the west. And then when you go to the west later, they're there.
Considering the fact I couldn't really read the text, that sounds good, I guess. Like I said, I was just kind of stumbling through the game because it was so hard to read what the hell was going on for me.
Absolutely. I get it. But the text was obviously really important because it was conveying a story the entire time. And it was almost like when we play Dungeons and Dragons and we're doing a dungeon crawl or something. And you can kind of pick up little pieces as to, oh, what was this room used for? Oh, what was this room used for? How do these things relate to each other? And there was an overarching story to the first dungeon, whereas the evil guys are trying to corrupt good dragon eggs to turn them into more draconians, which is getting into Krynn lore.
Speaking of draconians, okay, some tedious shit that when you kill those mofos that, oh, by the way, your sword is now like in your inventory. Oh, please make sure after combat to go into the inventory screen and re-equip it. I'm like, the hell is this? Because almost every other fight in there were those stupid draconians that did this. And every time you killed one, it's like, oh, your weapon's no longer equipped. Now you have to suffer through the inventory management screen to re-equip it. It's terrible.
They had to do that because this game, being Champions of Krynn, was deep into Krynn lore. Now, let me do a quick sidetrack to tell people who don't know about what Krynn is, or the Dragonlance series. So, the Dragonlance series of books were a really popular series of books in the late 80s, early 90s that were fantasy, and they were huge to me. When I was that age, they were the best books I'd ever read. I read them like 5 times.
Was that what the name of your first dog came from, Tanis?
Absolutely. Tanis was one of the, I don't want to say the main character, because it was really an ensemble cast, but if there was a main character, it would have been him. And that definitely left a huge impact on me, such that, 20 years later, I named my dog after him.
You have a lot of T-name dogs that you like. You had Tanis and now you have Tally.
Well, yeah, they're both great characters. Yeah. So, Dragonlance has a completely different kind of vibe than the world of Forgotten Realms, which is more of a traditional D&D world. So in Dragonlance, the most rare item is steel. So you use steel pieces, and they're, instead of halflings, they're a kender, which are like halflings but much cooler. And then there's also draconians. And draconians are corrupted good dragons. And it's really key to the overall Dragonlance storyline, the draconians, and then also because of their twisted magic, the way they die. And the easiest draconians, the Boz draconians, when you kill them, they turn to stone instantly. So it was really common in the novels for characters to have their weapons stuck in them in the middle of combat and be suddenly disarmed. So that they had to make that into the game, and they had to make it a combat mechanic where you had to take into account having an extra weapon to equip when your weapon gets stuck into a draconian.
I was so pissed when I noticed that my +1 weapon was gone. And I'm like, where is it? What the heck? And then luckily after combat, it was in my inventory. But I was pretty furious.
I am just really glad that they didn't show up in the loot screen at the end, so you didn't have to loot them to the individual
loot screen
people.
Is terrible too. Holy crap.
So again, going with the hardcore aesthetic, you're allowed to loot everything. It gives you a complete list of everything you find in an encounter. So you have 15 long swords and 20 shields, and it's a real mess to sort through. But the idea being that they're giving you the freedom to take everything if you wanted.
Couldn't fit everything anyways.
Well, it depends if your character was strong enough.
I think even if they're strong enough, your inventory screen will fill up.
I don't know. I think it's based on their encumbrance.
I don't know about that because I filled my inventory up with darts and it says you could not hold any more darts until I joined them.
Oh, well, yeah.
Darts
maybe.
are small.
Yes.
Yeah, the inventory screen can get full.
Yeah, so like I said, there are a lot of really modern elements to this game, including every zone will have a number of patrols that which are random encounters, and as you do more random encounters, you'll actually make random encounters less frequent, which is a pretty innovative idea, especially considering none of the Final Fantasies have anything like that.
Oh my god, I finally remember what the game reminded me of.
What's that?
It reminded me of the original Doom, but worse graphics and a small-ass screen in the side.
The original Doom?
I think so, yeah.
You haven't played Doom in forever. Doom is nothing like this.
No, with the stupid hallways, and all you see is the hallways.
Listeners, forgive her. She doesn't know. It's not what she talks about. The graphics in Doom are so much better than this.
I said it reminded me of the original Doom hallways, but way worse graphics. That's what I said.
I would say there's very little in common. If anything, it would look like Wolfenstein and not Doom. But anyways, so this game does have a lot of really modern features for it for the time, which really surprised me. The patrols, these scripted scenes when you enter into certain rooms. right? The dialogue options, where sometimes you can actually don't need to attack people. They'll let you go. And just,
Oh no, I always attacked them. Every bitch in there must die.
but if you compare it to something like Final Fantasy VI, which we just talked about a couple episodes ago, there was a lot more options. And I found that to be much more interesting rather than just the forced combat every single time.
For some reason, whenever I saw the options, attack, let them go, or talk to them, I just kept thinking of my ranger in D&D, and I'm like, oh no, she would kill and torture you all, sorry. There's no fleeing.
Well, exactly. And the funny thing is, I don't know if you noticed, but depending on which option you pick, it will actually affect future encounters.
I did not notice because I just killed them all.
Well, yeah. But if you let them go, they will warn people and there will be more people in a future encounter. There was one room, I don't know if you got there, where there's a cleric.
Yeah,
and they
bound
give you
and
the option
gagged him.
to bind and gag him. If you don't, if you let him go, then it makes future encounters much more difficult.
I was bummed out that I couldn't bind and gag them and then kill them or something. I don't know. It was like inflicting my rage on the game with how I was
Just wanted to kill everybody.
Yeah, I was playing my ranger who you call a murder hobo. She was like my inner, whatever, clicking attack, attack, attack.
The funny thing was I actually had her ranger in my party as well.
I didn't. I actually did not make my own ranger, funny enough.
She was an elven ranger and she killed everybody.
Yeah, good, because that's what she does.
So a couple other things which are incredibly modern for this game. We had in combat, you could have enemies both flee and surrender. What did you think of that?
It was okay. I mean, a few times that it took me a little bit to figure out what happened because the enemies would just poof, disappear. And how combat works is for some reason it continues the rest of the combat turn, even if there's no enemies around. So the first few times in combat, when the enemies surrendered, I guess, that's when they disappear, I was wandering around the map like, where the hell, what am I supposed to do now? And then it's like, would you like to end combat? I'm like, why didn't you just end combat to begin with? Yes, I want to end combat.
So the answers to a lot of these types of questions you've had, they're basically just programming limitations in 1990. There were the types of things that weren't easy for them to code in to check it every time to see if they're enemies. So it had to go through a full combat round to see if there are any enemies before it could end combat. This is something that is fixed in future Gold Box games.
Then why did it ask me if I want to end combat? I think the answer is always yes.
Well, there could have been options like, for example, if you had an enemy that was charmed, it could give you that, do you want to end combat? Yes, no. You could select no and then kill them to get more experience.
I didn't realize. Yeah, that makes sense. Because boy, I was charming enemies like a mofo.
Exactly. And that's part of how this game is meant to be played. But just the option of having the surrendering and the fleeing was really incredible stuff. Now, something that you mentioned briefly, when enemies surrendered, you said that you didn't really know why they surrendered, and that's because it does flash at the bottom in the info bar that they surrender. The problem was, and this is something that was just the way PC games were back in the day. So when computer games were first invented, they were designed to run off the computer's processor clock, right? So the animation speed, the text speed were all based on the speed of your computer. So I played this game on a computer that was 8 megahertz, right? It almost sounds ridiculous to say it today, obviously with one processor core. And today, I was playing it yesterday on a processor that's 4,000 megahertz with 8 cores. So when the emulation is doing it, it's doing it a little bit too fast, which is causing those things to flash. But that was actually extremely realistic because on my 8 megahertz computer, it ran a lot differently when I finally upgraded to a computer that was 66 megahertz, that was, 8 times faster. So those things would flash for me and I would not be able to fix it. And some games were literally, my computer was too fast to play. And this was a major issue in the 90s.
I don't get anything of what you just said, actually. I mean, I understand that it flashed fast and I didn't see... I mean, now and then I did see like words flash on the bottom of the screen. I'm like, oh, That was too fast. I didn't see it. Guess it wasn't important.
Yeah, so those were not meant to be that fast. They were just too fast because your computer's too fast. Obviously, your computer now is, 20,000 times too fast, but the emulator was probably emulating it too quickly. And those should have been, there for half a second for you to be able to read, or at least a second maybe.
Well, that might have fixed a lot of annoyances, but it probably would have annoyed me even more if it stayed too long.
Absolutely. So as you play this game, things get a lot of the issues that you're talking about, they get a lot better. I ended the game up with my highest level characters at level 5. Most of my party was 4 to 5. And it really made it a lot easier to hit things. And then I also started to get some much better spells. Where did you end up about?
Oh, geez. Level 3, I think?
Level 3? Okay.
Average level 3. Yeah. 3. Yeah.
So
I'd say 3.
You made it to the catacombs, which is the second level. First, there was the kind of town area, the hobgoblin town. And then you had the temple. And then you go down into the catacombs. Well, at the end of the catacombs, there's a boss, which I wish you would have gotten to.
It's great that you say, you were in the goblin village and then the temple, because it all just looked the same.
No,
so I didn't know.
The graphics changed when you went into the temple.
No, the graphics changed when I went into the catacombs. It was pretty much the same.
No, it was kind of like bluish, and then it was grayish in the temple, and then it was bluish again in the catacombs.
Yeah, no.
The graphics are pretty simplistic, so it's not easy. It's easy to get confused. But at the end of the catacombs, there's actually another graphics change where it's like red, like stalagmites. And then there's a boss. The boss is actually 2 baby white dragons.
Aww.
And this really cool graphics moment where in the first person view, there's a dragon that has its claw out and it's like slashing at you. It's very dramatic.
Whenever the combat came up and the hobgoblins charged at you and the mace twitched a little, the first few times I saw that, I almost burst out laughing with how ridiculous it looked. It's like,
well, they are hobgoblins. They're classic.
No, I'm thinking more about the graphics, quote unquote.
Yes, but some of them looked, much scarier when it was like the priest, the evil priest with his mace, right?
Sure.
Didn't that make you worried?
Sure. Whatever you say.
Or the draconians.
Fuck the draconians.
Exactly. So I was able to defeat the dual white dragons with, of course, Stinking Cloud, which is a spell which disables people. And in this version of Dungeons & Dragons, is that if someone was incapacitated, they could be killed with 1 shot, which I'm not exactly sure if that's exactly how the rules are in official D&D, especially with a ranged attack, which seems like kind of nonsense to me, because I am positive that in regular Dungeons & Dragons, if there's someone who's frozen in place, there's no way a mage throwing a dart could one-shot them.
Hey, my little Kender was knocking those frozen people out with a rock.
Absolutely. And a Kender with a hoopak is an adversary indeed. Did you find the hoopak +2?
No, I just got a hoopak +1.
Oh, well, I got a hoopak +2.
Congratulations.
A couple of things that I found interesting is that there are a couple of things which are a little bit sexist in this game, which I had forgotten were in the original Dungeons & Dragons rules. So in Dungeons & Dragons, if you had a fighter class with an 18 strength, which was the highest starting strength score, they got what was called exceptional strength. And you got to roll 2 dice, percentile dice from 1 to 100, and 1800 would be like the top strength possible in the game.
That pretty much means 1800.
Yeah, 1800. And 1801 would be the lowest exceptional strength. I had totally forgotten, but in the original first edition of D&D, females cannot go above 1850 exceptional strength.
That was the freaking reason?
That was the reason, yeah.
I was wondering what the hell was wrong with my Miz. I had a knight and a fighter. One was a guy, one was a girl. And the guy I was able to do 1800. But the girl was maxed out 1850 and I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah, that was it, unfortunately.
Ghetto.
Yeah, I was pretty upset about that. And then I remembered that was actually in the rules. That was literally the only difference between the sexes in the original Dungeons & Dragons.
So then why would anyone besides role-playing purposes play a female?
Well, if you weren't a fighter, it didn't matter at all. Because the exceptional strength is only for actual fighters.
Well, yeah, and you had to actually roll the chance. I get it.
Yeah. So it didn't come up all that much, but it was a really silly rule. And then the other thing I noticed, which is so silly, is that when you did hit a Boz Draconian with a female, it would actually use the wrong pronoun. It would say Krynn loses his weapon when she was clearly a her. Other than that, everything seemed pretty good.
I'm glad you paid attention to the text enough.
Well, that was one of those things that flashes. Remember that I was telling you about? You probably missed.
Yeah, I totally went in on miss. I didn't see squat.
Okay. So I'm going to give you my overall impressions of this game first, and then I will let my dear friend Calissa kind of give her impressions overall. So Champions of Krynn is a really important historical game for Dungeons & Dragons. It's one of the first Dungeons & Dragons games on PC. Now, obviously, it was not the first, but it definitely refined a lot of the elements from the earlier ones, like being able to use the arrow keys for the menus, which helped a lot. It was one of the first ones that added mouse support. Not that it was useful, but it was at least there. The mouse support is terrible, but at least it existed compared to some of the earlier gold box games. But overall, the graphics, they're what they are. They're 16 color EGA graphics. We both played this downloaded from GOG in DOSBox emulation. So it has 16 color EGA graphics, which is actually the best my computer could support at the time I played this. My computer did not have VGA yet. I actually played it back in the day on a Tandy 1000 SL. Like I said, running at a blistering 8 megahertz with 16 color graphics and Tandy sound. So the sound that you heard, Calissa, was exactly what I heard when I played it back in the day. I thought it sounded pretty good for the day. This game, yes, it's old. Yes, the graphics are old. But there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. There are story elements that are layered throughout it in a situation that is very similar to a game like Final Fantasy VI that we played. But I would say that there are even more little story elements throughout the game. Whether it's, you find something in a room or you get a note that describes what's going on, or you see someone flee down a hallway and then they're actually there. Lots of these elements really come together to make a pretty compelling role-playing experience. Now, there's a lot of tedium to this, whether it's memorizing spells or identifying items or selling things and that type of thing, leveling up your characters. But it's all, straight to those D&D rules. Now, should you play this game? Probably not.
Probably? If someone wants to play, no. If someone wants to play
it, it'll be your turn in just a second.
Fine.
Let me finish. Okay, so if someone wants to take a look at what an old school D&D game was like, you could pick this up on GOG for like $1, maybe a couple of dollars if it's not on sale, and give it a shot. See what you think about it. Now, if anyone out there is brave enough to actually play Champions of Krynn, tweet me at PureBlueOctopus with your impressions. I would absolutely love to hear it. Any screenshots you have of you beating the game or anything like that, I would go crazy. I probably won't play this more. Like I said, the last 2 games, I've already committed to beating Mass Effect and Tales of Berseria in my free time before they come up again. I may play some more. I found myself playing just a little bit more the other day after my 10 hours were already completed. This game is pretty fun. I enjoyed defeating the dragons, and then I went out into the wilds and defeated some ogres, and I started the next town and got into the next dungeon, and there's so much to unpack here, and it's such a great experience. And the other thing that I didn't mention, this game is massive. We played 10 hours. We touched the first dungeon. This game is at least 80 to 100 hours long. So is it a great game to play today? Not really. But is it a good game? Yes, it is a good game. It has historical value, and it definitely has some innovative story elements. Now, for the alternative viewpoint, my partner Calissa.
If you want to play a Dungeons & Dragons game, go play Baldur's Gate. Well, if you want to play an older Dungeons & Dragons game, play Baldur's Gate. Avoid this like the plague.
Is that all you have to say?
Yeah, that's all I have to say. I am thankful I made it the 10 hours, and oh my god, I was counting down the seconds.
So what if someone has already played Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2?
There's plenty of RPGs to play. You're talking about just Dungeons and Dragons RPGs?
And they're having a Dungeons and Dragons fix.
Get on Roll20 and find a campaign to play real Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know what you're asking me.
I'm asking you to recommend this game if they have nothing else to play.
No, I won't. There's plenty to play.
Okay. Well, good news for our listeners is that I have a whole slew of Dungeons and Dragons games lined up for the two of us to play together that she has never played. So this is not going to be her last experience playing an old school D&D game. Although the next one, which is several episodes from now, came out the exact same year. But I am sure that Calissa will be like, oh my God, I can't believe this game came out the same year. It looks like it's 10 years newer. And that was my impressions in 1990 when I played it. I was floored. But that's Eye of the Beholder, and that's several sessions away. So, Calissa, what are we playing next time?
Well, next week, I'm going to make you play Atelier Iris, Eternal Mana. It's actually the first Atelier game I've ever played. I know you have seen me playing some of the newer ones. It's a very niche role-playing game, and I know you're absolutely going to love it because it's based a lot on crafting.
So I have played a ton of MMOs and I've played a ton of other games with crafting. I can never fucking stand the crafting. I have never... yes.
Well, luckily this game doesn't have as much of the crafting element as the future games. And it was the oldest Atelier game I played, and I'm trying to choose the older games to start off on the series. Last week with Berseria, as I explained, was a fluke. Well, not a fluke per se, but because, I wanted you to play the first Tales game with a female protagonist. Where this is funny because this is one of the only Atelier games with a male protagonist. So have fun.
Isn't Atelier supposed to be the series with the cute Lolita schoolgirls?
Generally.
That's what I've always wanted to play one.
Yeah, the main character in Atelier Iris is Klein. So you get to play a guy.
Oh, well. Maybe next Atelier game.
Well, maybe next. We'll see. There's a few more before the current generation, so...
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. And if you do end up playing Champions of Krynn, please tweet me at Pure Blue Octopus.
And
if you
don't end up playing it, you could just tweet me at Calissa Spirit about anything else, please.
Just tweet her all your Champions of Krynn stuff. She'll love it. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good night.